Hello, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to the first lecture from the MAN 4720 class. And today, right now, we'll be talking about the first three chapters of this book, The Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I do encourage you to make sure you have those books and do the reading. It's very interesting. I think you can see right away where he's going with a lot of his commentary, Richard Rumelt. But it's very good reading. So let's just get into this. First, I want to just talk about a little bit about things that are key to strategy that come from these chapters. And I think that you'll see in his writing and also some of the other things that we'll be looking at that one of the main objectives of their books is to define what strategy is. And it's simply, one way to look at it is that its most basic idea is that it's an application of strength against weakness. Remember that strategy comes from a military tactic. It's only in the 1950s or so that strategy became used to describe business. But before that, it was the concept for using strategy and what strategic thinking was all about was military. And I think that's really where the application comes. How do we fight the battles of business these days? So anyway, I think that's really where that comes from. And I think that it's a good way to look at it, applying the application of strength against weakness. And further, he's noting that strategy is a bet on a certain diagnosis, on a certain worldview. And I think you'll see that in other writing as well, that the view that strategy is at the end of the day, when you come up with a strategy, what you're doing is you're making a bet. You're thinking this is the way it's going to go, and you're going to apply your resources against that. Not exactly like a horse race or going to the casino, but in a way not that different either, because if you're doing that sort of thing, you're really judging your how much you're willing to support or bet, and on an outcome that you think of what the percentage chances are. In fact, I think that's a key element of strategy, is defining not only what you're going to do, but the strategic, but the potential outcomes for the different options you take. Again, he points out the strategy is all about how an organization moves forward, and I think you'll see that throughout the book. And a lot that it really is talking about how a company goes ahead. I think that he notes that strategy is a coherent set of analysis, concept, policies, arguments, and actions that respond to a high-stakes challenge. You will see in a second on a further slide, but one of the key elements is in all strategies defining the issue. What is the problem? What is the problem? What's the challenge? What are we facing? What are we doing? What do we need to do? And all those come across. And I think you'll see one of the key concepts in these chapters is not making a mistake on what strategy is all about. It's not, for example, goal setting. It's not about short-term things that are really just identification rather than how your actions are to get there. So the key thing here is to be able to know what the challenge is, what the issue is, where are you going, and what your problem is. He notes, and I think you'll see in Porter's writings a lot too, based on that strategy, successful strategy includes some sort of handling of the competition, either blocking them, eliminating them, or doing something to counteract the ever-present competitive forces that go against you. By the way, on the Porter book, I think that his article, The Five Competitive Forces, if you don't have that book yet, you should be able to download that somewhere on Google. It's a very common thing. I know that many of you probably take the Harvard Business Review, have a subscription to there or whatever, but I think that one you should be able to get that article and those key things fairly easily. And I'll give a short talk on that in today or tomorrow. Now, the one thing he points out is really true is that the more dynamic the situation, the poorer your foresight will be. The way to put that is that the more facts you have, the more facts you're able to get, and the more certain you are of those facts, it shapes how your strategy is formed. If it's very fluid, if you don't know what's happening, if it's very difficult to predict, then your ability to perceive the future, which is really a lot what strategy is about, is going to be limited. So what you'll want to do is you really consider the more you know, the more sure you are of what you know, the more willing you should be to identify a strategy and to support that financially with other resources, etc. Conversely, when something's really unclear, when you really can't tell what's going on, when it's difficult to ascertain that the things you think are facts really are facts, then you should be a lot more cautious. That's like, again, going back to the betting analogy, that would be like, betting on a horse that's 100 to 1 versus one that's 1 to 2. There are factors and reasons why people think that the one horse is going to do so much better than the others, and those are usually well thought out and understood. So you have to apply that to your strategic thinking as well. A key thing that he meant, which you'll see in the other books as well, is that when you're working on strategy, it's very helpful to think of focusing your energy and your resources on one or a few pivotal objectives. The terminology I use is the big five. I think that anytime you are able to do 5 major things in a given year in business, you've really done well. If you talk to people in business, or those of you who are working, if you think back on a year when you were able to accomplish 5 big things, well, then you probably got promoted and got a lot more money and did a lot more things. It's not easy. There's so many conflicting things that happen at work, and so many rabbit holes people go down, and often you get so spread out and that you don't accomplish anything. And I'll tell you, and this won't be the first time you've heard this, but getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things done is much better than a whole bunch of things half done. You'll see companies that have dozens of strategic objectives, and it's impossible to complete them. You need to be focused. You need to really be focused, and you need to apply your resources against that focus. Again, think of the big 5, big 3, whatever helps you do, but really getting things done, a few things, is vital. Now, this next slide on strategy, Richard Rumelt starts talking about bad strategy. Now, again, his book is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. What he spends a lot of initial time doing, of course, is defining what bad strategy is all about. And I think that's really key. It's important to see that and be able to recognize what you're looking at. You might find it odd or maybe even controversial what he claims that so many companies don't have a strategy or don't have good strategy. I find that to be absolutely the case. And in my work as a consultant, you see companies that have a strategy because they have to, they're supposed to. It might weigh a certain amount, it might have a bunch of pages, but when it comes right down to it, the real strategies are not that common. In fact, it's a competitive advantage to have a strategy, and a good one, and one can be effectively implemented, because not everyone will do so. Those of you thinking of becoming entrepreneurs or starting your own businesses, it's even more vital because you don't have that infrastructure of the company around you. You don't have that ongoing legacy. It's new, it's different, it's now. So you have to come up with things that are strategically well-defined and that you can really base your future actions in your business on. So it's good to know it's bad. So, and I think he points out a good point there, saying that it's not that bad strategy, failed strategy, it's just a wrong way of thinking about strategy in the first place. So let's go over a few of those things quickly here that he mentioned in the book. A bad strategy is long on goals and short on policy or action. You will see many times companies will have what looks like a strategic process. They'll have strategic objectives, and they'll have an end point where they want to get to, but they won't have anything in between in terms of action. And they get away with that because a lot of times they'll go to their boards or go to other manager and they'll say, we want to open 3 offices next year in the West Coast. Okay, that sounds great, done. But how are they going to do that? How are they going to staff it? Who's going to be moving there? What are the costs involved? All those sorts of things that are really the steps, the action steps to get to that point are left out. However, from the big picture point of view, which a lot of board members, that's all they want to see, it looks like there's a strategy, and there really isn't. And that goes along with the second point there that assumes that goal setting is the end. It's not. Goal setting is one of the very first things you do in strategy. And I'll mention that again, but just to say it, when your goals are one of the very fundamental first steps of how you set up the strategy development process, where you want to go. is a key thing. So that's your goal, and those kind of things that just saying the goals and defining them is a key part, but it's not the strategy, not the end of the strategy. The other thing he notes a couple of times, and again he calls it fluff, which we'll look at in a second, is that using a bunch of commonly used words, or high sounding words, or buzzwords from business does not make a strategy. It's extremely common for if you read strategic objectives or strategies from companies, that they'll have a whole bunch of things that are just buzzwords, that are kind of gibberish, that don't make any sense. My tendency and preference is, and probably why I chose this book, is that let's make it clear. Let's say what we want to say. We all use things like value proposition. Nothing wrong with it. But what are we offering? What are we doing? What are we giving? What are we selling? Those are all things that should be working there too. So people understand what we're really trying to say, and we understand ourselves. If we use a bunch of words that don't mean anything, or that have changed meanings, or that we change the meanings of them ourselves, we lose the power of communication. So let's try to be really clear on what we're talking about, clear on our strategies, and go from there. One thing he mentions that sometimes you'll see strategic thinking and objectives and strategy in general talking about underperformance. That's really, he's right. That's a detour. Underperformance is a different set of circumstances, different set of variables. Underperformance could be a result of bad strategy. It could be completely apart from bad strategy. That's not your strategy. That's an impact, or impacts your strategy, or impacts your ability to achieve your strategy. But just saying we want to change our underperforming things, whether it's a call center, whether it's a sales process, whether it's your project management, all those things are not strategies. Those are things that help you or hinder you from getting to your strategic objectives. I think he makes a real good point on this concept, which goes back to the business verbiage on let's all be of one mind, shared common values. You see all the time that companies say we got there because we have a shared vision. Really, do you think Apple has a shared vision? Do you think Google has a shared vision? Facebook? They've got a few people in certain places that certainly do, but everybody else is working there, and they're working on the vision or shared vision of their teams. You don't need everybody in an entire organization to be thinking the exact same thing. You want key people to be thinking something where you're going. You want a lot of implementers, and you want kind of distribute your strategy to individual work unit and business unit strategies where they can be like-minded. But to say we want everybody to be thinking like this, that's just, first of all, it can't happen, and second, it's just something that it really doesn't work, and it's something that people say but aren't doing. So why say it? Okay, then let's look at this last slide here. And here's a picture of the graphic that he uses, which basically says bad strategy is it kind of has different factors that fall into there, and he lists them there, and we've covered a few of them already. One is fluff. Again, it's gibberish masquerading as strategic concepts or arguments. You will see this a lot, and I think that a lot of I used to work for Price Waterhouse Coopers for a while, and you could get away with sometimes seeing clients and just overwhelming them with consultant speak, and consultants are really smart and they're extremely hardworking, so they're not taking away from them. But one of the ways they overcome the people in the business is to sound a lot smarter. Sometimes they are a lot smarter. I'm not taking that away from them, but they overwhelm them with concepts and words that are not actually identifying real things. And I think that's what he's talking about here, fluff. Bad strategy covers up its failure to guide by embracing the language of broad goals, ambition, vision, and values. Those are all kind of things that they're fine, but it's not strategy. So I think he's trying to say, let's keep our language clear. Let's say what we mean. Let's identify the issues, and let's work positively and effectively toward them helped by a clear understanding of what we're doing. Failure to face and recognize the challenge. I see this all the time. I call it a little bit differently. The way I look at it is lack of being honest with yourself about where you are. You can see this in your personal lives. If somebody says, I want to do this, or I want to go here, and you think, but you're not even. That's not possible because you're not where you are. Won't allow that, and that's the same thing with a company. People tend to be concerned about being clear about where they are. If you don't know where you are, it's like, say you want to take a trip to Orlando. If you don't know you're in Miami, then how are you going to get there? You won't know. You won't be able to define a roadmap. And often, a good analogy of a strategy is a roadmap to your destination. It works. It's fine. And like a roadmap or like a trip, you have to know where you are. So you have to be really honest with yourself, honest with each other, and be clear. You'll see a lot of groups, when you get in a group, tend to flow away from the truth of the situation. They like the way it sounds if you say it this way. Does everybody say, why are we different? Because we're a customer-focused company. No one treats their customer better than we do. That's not true. Only one company treats their customer better than everybody else, whoever that may be. Most things like that are just simply untested and untrue. A lot of times I'll talk to clients and they'll say, our call center is fantastic, or our account opening process is great. So I tell them, well, call them yourself. Open your own account in your own bank and see what happens. How long does it really take? A lot of things we think are true are just not. So you have to be clear of what you are. If you cannot define or move forward on your strategy unless you're clear on where you are now and honest with yourself. And then it goes along with in this book's concept of recognizing the challenge. I look at them a little bit similar. They're different, of course, but it's about honesty of where you are and an honesty about where your challenge is in front of you. Mentioned this before, mistaking goals for strategy. Goals aren't strategy. Goals are the beginning of the strategy process. When you start thinking, what do I want? It's the same thing, and we'll look at this a little bit differently, but a goal is often the difference between what you have and what you wanted. Where are we? Where do we want to be? What do we have? What do we want? What do we expect? What do we get? These are things that create gaps and then lead to the formation of goals, which we'll see in a little bit in another talk. But it's key to think, once you've identified the goal, that's not your strategy. That is a goal. And then there are a whole bunch of steps after that definition that lead you to get to writing or coming up with an effective strategy. He's right about that. Goals are not strategy. But you'll see so many times companies will present their goal as if it were strategy. And they'll say, our strategy is to grow by whatever. Our strategy is to become the best. That's a vision, it's a concept, but it's not the strategy. Those are out there things that you're shooting for that you have to develop a strategy to get to. Finally, bad strategic objectives. This goes back to having too many things, for example. The other is just being unfocused. If you say, we want to open more, we want to do additional, we want to grow, we want to become the number whatever. These things are really not clear. They're not focused. It's like your own goals and objectives. If you've worked in a company that sets those at the beginning of the year, you say, we want you to build 47 of these. That's a lot easier to say, build as many as you can. How do I know how many? If the concept is to try to make it numerical, measurable, definable. Strategic objectives are that way too. You want to be clear. You want to know how many, how much, where, when, and be really strict on what those definitions are. Along with that, he's saying the restatement of the challenge with a set of solutions. Yeah, just saying that my objective is to, again, we've found that we're lagging behind our sneaker sales in Des Moines. That's not a strategy. That's not even an objective. That's an observation, a measurement, a concept that you need to figure out what's going on, but it's not a strategy, nor is it even really a goal. Just to end, why and how does this happen? Again, there are a lot of reasons why people come up with a bad strategy. A lot of it is a lack of experience. Usually people in business are asked to do strategic things once a year, once in a while. They're not in the business of strategy, and they haven't developed a process. As you'll see when we look at the other book, Inspired, Logical, and Strategy That Works, that's a process. That's a tested and true, tried process of developing strategy. It comes from experience. It comes from the way of looking at things. It's nothing. These people are not dumb. They're not stupid. It's just that they don't have the experience, or that they've gotten into like a loop of a way of working with each other that just doesn't work in terms of developing good strategy, because they fall into those things that we looked at the last slide on bad strategy. It's not a negative thing on them necessarily. But the one thing I would say, you want to see people willing and able to be honest with themselves and where their company stands at the moment. That, I think, is a valid criticism. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's not fool each other. Let's be honest with ourselves. If you're in a company that won't allow that, well then, move or switch or do something different. But we need to be honest and clear with ourselves before. And again, like yourself in your own personal life, you need to be straight with yourself and honest and open and recognize where you're going before you can move forward. All right, well, thank you very much for this first look. Again, these chapters are 1 through 3 in the Good Strategy, Bad Strategy book. I think it's interesting, and I think it does give a very good basis for where this book is going next. Appreciate that, and please let me know if you have any questions or comments on this, and we'll be looking at the next lecture pretty soon. Thanks a lot.